it's a challenge because, see, medicine is a profession, it's not a science. And it's a profession that's based on science, kind of like being an architect is, based on math and science, geometry, and some principles of physics and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they are mathematicians or physicists. And so doctors are not molecular biologists and in general. Most doctors have never done research in a lab, um, don't develop hypotheses and then test them and then publish papers, and that's a very distinct process. And it depends, of course, on what system a person was trained in or what school they were trained in. And I happened to go to a school, Stanford, that was very research oriented, and research was very much a part of the way medicine was practiced. But when you look at professions and how a professional is supposed to conduct themselves, and they have a code of professional conduct. And so kind of to treat it in more of an as imagery, like in an impressionistic sense, excuse me, there people have certain expectations of a professional. And a professional basically is always supposed to be right. They're never supposed to be wrong. Like a priest. A priest should never misquote the Bible. They should never get the dates mixed up. So it was like, well, Jesus's father was Joseph or was it Frederick? They're supposed to like, boom, hit that, nail it, nail it, nail it, nail it. So if somebody comes along and finds new books of the Bible, apocryphal texts, like from the Qumran caves or whatever, and so then there's these Essene, you know, chapters that people say should go in the Bible, but the people that have already studied the Bible and have read it in 4 or 5 different languages, English, Aramaic, Latin, um, Coptic texts, if you suddenly say, well, that's only half the Bible, they're not going to want to deal with it, right? Most of them, except a few academics and scholars, but the institution, I don't imagine the Pope and the Vatican want to undergo a huge renovation, and include Eve in the picture, the painting of the creation. So now there's two fingers touching, God's finger or whatever. It's like once you're a professional, there is this body of knowledge that you've shown mastery over, beyond mastery, which would be a master's degree, to a level of a doctoral level, which comes from the Latin word docere, or depends on if you use ecclesiastic pronunciation, you could say docere, but it's to teach. It just means to teach. So you have been indoctrinated sufficiently that you can now repeat that doctrine to others and indoctrinate others, teaching others. Okay. And so, and it's funny that pedagogy, this whole space of teaching, somehow is not related to pedophilia, but that's another discussion. Sometimes it is, unfortunately, but that's another discussion. But words fascinate me. Anyway, so doctors, imagine a doctor being like somebody who in the 1400s or something was taught, a map maker was taught that the earth is flat, and then somebody comes back with Columbus or whoever, Magellan or somebody, and says, no, it's not flat, it's round. Wow. Do those map makers really want to accept that? Do they disagree because of factual reasons or emotional reasons? Because it disturbs their entire profession and their way of thinking and all of these things. I mean, the revelation that there's a new world there, that there's a whole other part of the planet beyond the horizon, it's not a serpent there swallowing all the boats, that's psychotropic, that's psychoactive. It changes their perspective. And not everybody likes to have their perspective change when they're 45 years old or even 35 years old, and they spent 15 years training their mind to think a certain way. And so in medicine, along comes this new world called the endocannabinoid system. And it's as different from what had they been taught in medicine as the new world was different than the concept of the world that Europeans had before they sailed across the Atlantic and all that stuff. And so suddenly in the new world there are potatoes and tomatoes and vanilla, and there's rubber tree plants, and there are people that look different, and the climate is warm, and the bugs that bite you give you things like yellow fever and dengue. And it's just like, wow, this is just this is all part of the same planet. You know, it's hard to imagine that somehow that place at the Amazon rainforest is connected to the same body, the same mass that, you know, London and Stockholm and Paris are a part of. And so for the physician to suddenly have to integrate this other system and with all the other systems that they learned about, because they were taught about it. It's like, okay, this is how the body works. This is the operating system of the body, you know, the pulmonary and the cardiovascular, central nervous system, and integuments, digestive system. We have these 7 systems, 8 systems, whatever, and this is how it works. Okay, great. And so then that's what you believe. And so, but if you find out that the operating system of your smart device, because the body is really just a smart device, but say your mobile phone or your tablet, that, well, there's this other operating system that actually controls all of those systems. It's like, really? What's that called? Oh, it's called Google. That upsets people because suddenly they find out, oh, I thought that the battery on my phone was dead, but there's another system that can actually turn down the dial on my display to make me think that the battery is low when it's not actually low, because that thing, that little icon, is just an icon. So that means I'm an iconoclast, right? I'm a Cathar, but anyway, hopefully I won't be burned at the stake. But anyway, that icon is a representation of how much energy is in the battery. It is not the energy itself. The thermometer outside of your window is a representation of the amount of heat in the air and the environment. It is not the heat itself. And we're used to looking at these representations. So you look at heart rate and blood pressure and blood sugar and all these different icons to diagnose what's going on inside of a person. And the word diagnosis is, again, going back to the roots, dia, which is across, dia, and gnosis, which is knowledge, which then sounds like Gnosticism and agnostics and all these things. But yeah, it's the same root word. So the diagnostic process is to try and know something across a barrier. You want to be able to transcend the physical barrier of the body to comprehend what's going on in the heart, like L'Hopital and the stethoscope to listen to. Okay, so you have this concept. Well, you know, there was a time they didn't know how blood circulated in the body. You know, there's a lot of things that weren't known at a certain time. So imagine being a doctor 10 years out of medical school and you find out, oh, there's this thing called the circulatory system, and the heart actually pumps the blood all around the body. It doesn't just slosh around as you move, you know, and come out when somebody sticks you with a spear or shoots you with a bullet. It's actually moving through these little discrete, you know, passageways that are like tunnels or tubes. That's going to be hard for a person to change their whole expert mind. And like I said, this endocannabinoid system modulates the other systems. So the endocannabinoid system modulates function of the central nervous system. It modulates function of the immune system. It modulates function of the digestive system. But worst of all, perhaps the most catastrophic thing, the heretical statement, is that being royalists, right, the British Empire, of which the United States is a part, the world dominating powers are monarchy types. You know, even China, even though it's supposedly communist, it's very much like a top-down system, right? So we see everything that way. When you look at nature, you know, the lion is the king of beasts. Why? Because it can kill something? Why should there even be a king of beasts? And you know, the builder of the pyramids was the pharaoh king Cheops, you know, Khufu, depending on which name you want to call him by. What makes you think he built it? Why is everything, you know, Alexander conquered half of the known world by himself? No, there was his army, there were other people. So we have this thing, we want to give all the credit, you know, God save the queen, God save the king, you know, hey, the president, the hero, LeBron James, whatever. We always want to look at it as though this one person did everything. THC, that's our hero. No, CBD is our hero. So there's this characteristic of wanting to think that everything is controlled by this. And so finally they decide, okay, it must be the brain, and the brain controls everything. When people get upset, their heart rate changes, their respiratory rate changes, and all the control systems are there in the central nervous system. Hooray, that's it. It's like, well, no, but they're all connected. So actually, how you feel in your stomach can affect your mood. If your GI tract is depressed, if your gut flora are quote unquote depressed, the person will become depressed. So there's a communication going back and forth. And so it's not just going from parents down to children. If the children are crying and the children are upset, then the parents get upset, and if the parents get upset, then the children get agitated. There's this communication going back and forth. It's not just people waking up and saying, and what shall we do to serve thee today? I am Christopher, your tasker. I shall do as commanded. You actually have free will, right? And so the idea that there is this kind of level playing field in the human body, and that the stomach does what it does depending on what the mind says and depending on the mood the person's in, well, then it makes it exceedingly difficult to make categorical diagnostic decisions about a 35-year-old white male, with 2-week history of lumbar pain.